Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me on this afternoon. All right, y'all. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. Today, we are talking about comparison, and we're talking about comparison not being the problem. It is what gets rewarded at work. So if you're joining me live, I hope that you are having a great day so far. And hey, if you're catching the replay, that's okay. I hope that you are still enjoying the episode. And in each ever case, whichever case, y'all, I'm just struggling today. You can feel free to type in the chat or send me a direct message and let me know if you have questions or if you have comments, because I feel like this topic is definitely something that is different and that is definitely going to maybe warrant a couple of questions, which questions are good. All right, y'all. So we are talking about comparison and comparison not being the problem. So let's go ahead and get into what this is all about. So first off, I think before I get in too far, I think it's important to share that comparison, I understand that comparison can be something that is not only seen as negative, but it can create a lot of negative feelings. It can create it can validate a lot of concerns that people have. And so I want to start off by saying that I'm not going to pretend that comparison can't be harmful, right? On the other side of that, there is something that we don't really talk about. We don't really talk about comparison as being something that can be useful, as being something that can be a tool. And here is why it can be a tool. When we think about organizations, and a lot of times when they misinterpret the efforts or the actions of professionals, those professionals start to get a little frustrated. And hey, if you've ever been in that situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Getting frustrated because they see other people getting recognition, they see other people getting promoted, and they're wondering, what am I doing that's missing the mark? How am I not creating workplace value? And in the process of trying to figure it out, do you know what they do? They compare. They compare. They start to look at what is getting noticed. They start to look at what is getting attention. And so, in that context, comparison is about pattern recognition. It is about picking up on what is working versus what is not working, picking up on what is desirable. All right, y'all. So before we delve further into that today, for those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Lepora Lindsay, and I speak about workplace value. And one of the things that we've really been focused on this year is how oftentimes efforts and actions in the workplace get misread or mistranslated, as in the organization hasn't made it clear what does it mean to create value? What does it mean to do something that is beneficial and useful? And so everything that we've been covering up until this point has been about not how any one individual, but how the organization as a whole, everyone at each level can take a role and really interpreting and figuring out what is going to move progress forward. All right. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get back into this topic on today when it comes to comparison. So, comparison is a signal scanner, if we want to be able to summarize it in the workplace. We compare when there is no clear standard and we're trying to figure out, what does it mean to be an excellent employee? What does it mean to be a great coworker? We compare when we look at who gets promoted. We compare when we try to figure out who gets visibility. We compare when we try to figure out who is getting protected or who survives layoffs or who gets praise. All of that creates comparison. And in the process of us trying to figure out what's working, we're getting additional information that says, don't compare, mute it. Don't do it. Oh, that rhymed. I didn't mean to do that, but I did. Right? So we're saying mute it, don't do it. Don't compare yourself to other individuals. But here is where that challenge comes in, because comparison is a natural process. It is part of how we create standards, how we create benchmarks is by looking at a reference point and looking at other individuals or other items that help us meet that point. And so when we say, well, don't compare, now what we're doing is we still are, but now we're just comparing at a surface level. So instead of us looking deeper into the who gets promoted, we stop at the, well, they got promoted and I didn't. And then we summarize it based on those surface level comparisons. And so we are not being able to use it in a way that is beneficial because we have already decided that, hey, this is not something that I want to do. And so that is why I say comparison isn't the problem. It is how we do it or what else is happening else in the system that is the challenge. When we look at how someone is doing something, typically we get into a mindset of, oh wow, they're how did they get that far? I want to be there. But we don't ask further questions. We don't explore any further. All right, so let's tie this back into the organization and how we get to this point. So, any and every organization, whether it's for profit, whether it is nonprofit, whatever the case may be, each organization, they reward certain things. Now, some of those things are universal when we think about responsiveness, when we think about visibility, when we think about busyness, when we think about loyalty. And when we sum it up, it can be summed up as it is what gets rewarded is based off of proximity. And what I mean by that is the individuals who are in charge of what gets recognized or what gets an increase or what gets promoted, what they can see or what is close to them, it is easy for them to say, wow, this is something that deserves recognition. And so when you have individuals who are not within that sphere, and they're wondering, what am I doing that's wrong, or what am I doing that's off, then they're going to naturally go to that comparison. And so they're going to try to figure out what counts. How can I optimize this? How can I do more? How can I go a little bit further? And so this is the part that I'm really excited about because I've been looking into this for a while when it comes to how we mistranslate how work and effort is mistranslated and we go into comparison naturally and organically. So how can we use this as a tool? Well, there is something that I've created and I facilitated in workshops, and it's called Pad A. And Pad A is essentially a process where we can, whether as a professional, an individual, or whether as a leader leading a team, we go through this process to understand how can we use comparison effectively. And that is with first pausing and trying to just figure out what's going on with us and then assessing the situation. So when we're comparing ourselves to a situation, or even if you are comparing employees, looking at what do we like, what do we dislike, and even questioning whether or not this is something that we want to utilize for ourselves. And then that D is deciding, hey, how can we go forward from here? And then that last A, if we decide, is taking action on what we initially compared ourselves to. Long story short, what ends up happening is while we may have started off comparing ourselves to another person or comparing two individuals to each other, by the time we have implemented the action, we then fall into a natural phase of evaluating what we have done. And then we start to look at how we can improve. And so going through this process really helps us to figure out how to go from a mindset of looking at others from a point of envy, from jealousy, to a point of being inspired by what you're seeing and using that as a catalyst to say, hey, this is what I like what they're doing, but I don't like this part of what they're doing, and this is how I can move forward. Or looking at two individuals from a leadership perspective, I see what this person is doing, and this is how this person is doing. How can we get this person not to be exactly as person A, but how can we get person B to be the best that they can be? There I go again. Right? And that's how all of these things work together. When we look at, so comparison doesn't have to be the enemy, nor am I saying it is the magic fairy, but it is a learning tool. But we have to be open to understanding that process. All right, y'all. I know y'all are quiet today, but I hope that this is something that has kind of opened your mind a little bit to how we can truly approach comparison in a different way than how we have in the past. So if you have comments or you have questions, feel free to message that to me because I would love to hear from you. All right. So as we are winding down here, let's kind of summarize the things that we've spoken about today. So we've spoken about the fact of organizations oftentimes misinterpreting the effort or the actions that employees put forth. When that happens, employees are looking at what they're doing versus what other employees are doing. And what are they doing? They are naturally comparing. They are bridging the two. They are bridging between what is getting rewarded in another employee versus what is getting rewarded in themselves. What we've covered here today is how to take something that we are already doing. We already compare and using it as a learning tool, not necessarily controlling it, but guiding it in a way that will be extremely helpful the more we practice it. I actually have these cards here. I call them the comparison shift cards, and I'll show you a little example. So this one here says, oh, wrong side. I should be there by now, right? That's one of the typical thoughts. Even when we're talking about in the workplace, I should be there by now. I should have been promoted by now. I should have been in that position by now. I should have. But how can we reframe that going through that pad A? When we reframe that, we get to a point where we say, compared to what version of success in whose? So I should be there by now, right? That's typically how we compare, but then we can change that to compare to what version of success and whose version of success. It's the same thing, but we are just looking at it. Sorry, y'all, the glare is really bad. We're just looking at it differently. And if that is something that, as we prepare to close now, if that's something that you are interested in, I will drop the link here. If you all wanted to take a look at purchasing that tool, and it's a long one, so I'll keep it up. So we were talking about, how can we use comparison as and it's on Etsy. So if you just type in comparison card deck, you'll find it on Etsy. But when we just talk about, what is the important aspect of comparison? How can we use it in a way that is beneficial? How can we grow? Comparison allows us to do that. And it allows us to do that in a way that everyone can win. We can increase engagement. We can increase understanding. We can increase collaboration because we're no longer looking at other people as a competitor or envy or jealousy, but we're looking at them like, I like this, I don't like this. Is this something I want to use for myself? And if so, how do I want to use this? All right, y'all. So I'm getting ready to close out today. This has been a topic that I've really been passionate about sharing, and I really would like to hear from you about what do you think about comparison, right? This is something that's new, and I know that we don't talk about it often, so I'm really ready to have more conversations around this, and I'm curious if you want to have more conversations around this as well. All right. So that's my time for this week. And depending on how the conversations go, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. But no matter what you do throughout the work week, remember to stay adding value. All right, y'all. Have a good one. Bye.